you who they've never met before, never mind the target of their anger, in this case, Donald Trump. You just can't do it. And that's what the real problem of all this is, at least as I can see it.
Now, Nick, we can't let the occasion pass without talking a little bit, I think, about the role that social media has played in all of this and the reaction to it as well. And the question I have is, when you look at Twitter now cutting off Donald Trump, when you look at Facebook and Instagram cutting off Donald Trump, and then you look at Amazon and Google and these servers cutting off Parler or Parlay or whatever the name is, however they want to pronounce it. It really looks to me like collusion, and it really looks to me like they're opening themselves up to some antitrust lawsuits in the United States. And even Angela Merkel and President Macron in France, and Merkel, of course, is president in Germany. Even Macron and Merkel this week or yesterday came out criticizing Twitter and the other social media platforms for their behavior, saying that it's not a reasonable way for your companies to behave, and you shouldn't have banned Trump. And these guys are not Trump friends; they're not Trump allies, and so something I think has to be done about social media that they can control so much of the narrative, and now through this behavior they're demonstrating their willingness to really basically shut up people that don't agree with their point of view or the point of view of their executives. I can't think of a better example of antitrust behavior, of collusion, and I'm wondering, isn't it time now that the legislative branches of different governments around the world recognize these guys for what they are? They are monopolies, and they behave as monopolies, and they should now be treated as monopolies and broken up.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right about that. It's the very same thing, to put it in layman's terms, as grocery stores colluding to keep the price of bread high. Because what we're dealing with is the ability to search online and get information from different sources and come to our own conclusions, all being controlled, throttled, and even shut down by these large multimedia platforms. And while each of them is a private enterprise, when you collude with other private enterprises, we have laws against that. And you've mentioned them already, antitrust. We have all kinds of different things like that, that in order to protect the consumer against unfair pricing policies. And this is no different, in my mind, than that kind of a scenario, what we're seeing now through these different organizations. And it's funny that you mentioned Parlay. They not only have been blacklisted, they have been completely shut out of the marketplace by all the other platforms. They don't even have a server anymore. Now, granted, I don't know what it takes to run a server, but you've got to ask yourself, if they can, what do they say to the companies that were going to provide the servers in order to get them to dump this contract? Because it was going to be a huge step forward. I'll call it. It was gonna, from a numbers point of view, it was building to be a huge success, and it didn't seem that it mattered to the other platforms. They didn't care about. They wanted to squelch the competition and have their worldview predominate, no matter what it took. And that's the part that I think people should be aware of.
And a number of commentators at Fox News and some other conservative commentators out there have pointed out, quite rightly, that if the criteria that you're using to determine whether or not the platform encourages violence or not, and of course that was the argument. My understanding is that was the justification that both Google and Amazon, who were providing the servers for Parler or Parlay again, that they were saying, look, this social media platform allows for commentary that incites to violence, and so they went even, take Amazon by cutting off Parler. They've gone even exponentially further than what Twitter did. Twitter, of course, was saying, well, we're going to cut Trump off. And a number of other contributors to Twitter that were more or less Trump supporters that were talking about the some of the fraud that appears to have gone on in the election in some of the various jurisdictions. And so that itself was problematic enough. But then along comes Amazon and says, well, we're going to cut Parler off entirely because they allow this. And I'm actually, just as we're speaking, looking at tweets that are replies to me from total lunatics in the States that, some of these guys incite violence all the time. And then Putin has a Twitter account. The Ayatollahs have Twitter accounts. All of the tin pot dictators around the world, some of whom are the most vile human beings out there, they all have their Twitter accounts, but nobody seems to care about it. And, sometimes I have to say, Nick, I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe where, how is it possible for anyone, and there's lots of, we may disagree with people, broadly speaking, on the left of the political spectrum on a wide range of issues, but I don't want them to shut up. And by and large, my experience is people are very reasonable, right wing, left wing. We just don't agree on everything. That's okay. But then you talk to them about the behavior of the leaders on the left, and it's like there's a switch that gets turned off in their head, and they just can't accept the fact that the people that they're defending are just as unreasonable, just as kooky, and often just as violent as anyone they're criticizing on the right. And one more observation, Nick, and that is, look at the response on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday to the violence in Washington amongst conservative commentators who were not afraid to say, President Trump, I like you, I support you, but, you crossed the line when you gave that speech that you should have known that it was going to potentially lead to violence. Now, whether that was the cause or not, set that aside for a minute. At least when they thought that was the cause, and if they still think it was a cause, commentators on the right are not afraid to hold their leaders accountable when they feel that their leaders have crossed the line. And it seems like there's no line on the left that leaders on the left can cross that's going to precipitate some kind of criticism from their own followers. And I find that deeply, deeply disturbing.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I run into that mental switch myself. Like, you can be having a conversation with someone, find out you don't necessarily agree on everything. Okay, well, that's fine. I get it. If everybody agreed with me, the world would be perfect, and that's not going to happen. So, there's obviously going to be differences of opinion out there, and we can live with that. We can accept that. But holy smokes, the way that the world is right now, it just makes my head swim. You can't have a conversation with people without that disconnect. If you bring it back home to Canada, if you're talking to somebody who's a Liberal supporter, and there's lots of things that we agree and disagree on between the average Liberal supporter and people like you and I. But when it comes to the leadership of the party, Trudeau, and you run down the list, and you say, well, what about that? Like, how can you support a party that has a leader that condones, a communist dictatorship like China? Oh, well, that doesn't affect me. Well, yeah, it does, because you're associated through your party affiliation.
Now, it's funny.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead and finish your thought.
Well, just basically saying that it doesn't matter what side of the border you're on, this mental attitude, this amazing ability to simply disconnect and compartmentalize these different issues so that one doesn't affect the other. Well, life doesn't work in a vacuum. You can't do that and still have some semblance of common sense.
I just noticed a comment that Marin made in the chat room, and we've all heard the saying, I see, said the blind man. And but in this case, Marin, I have to tell you, it's actually the inversion of that. What we're running into is the people going, I can't see, when they have perfect vision. So it's, I can't see, said the men with perfect vision. And that's what's so bizarre and maddening about it. And that's why I say it's like existing in a parallel universe. It's like, are you even breathing the same air that we're breathing? Because this isn't ideological. I can see this with my own two eyes, and surely to goodness you can as well. Anyway, we're going to go, Nick, we have to go for a quick break. We ran a little bit over time because we were fixing some of those technical issues. So I thought, we wanted to finish up the topic. So we're going to be back in a few minutes. If you're listening to the live show, we'll be back here on ThinkRadio.ca. If you're listening to the podcast, thanks for joining us. And make sure you catch us the next time here on the Nick and Joe Show.